No question, there are some serious issues surrounding commercial real estate right now.
Is real estate the next shoe to drop in the aftermath of what we saw with the banks?
And for today's Bloomberg Big Take, we're breaking down how higher interest rates are influencing property values, the commercial real estate market.
Housing market in the USA is in the middle of its sixth major downturn since the late 1960s. Housing prices are declining in 75% of the major cities, and in many areas they have been falling for 6 or 7 consecutive months. In this video, we will examine the distribution of housing price declines and show where housing prices have dropped the most and where they have held up the best. We will also compare the depth and duration of this housing downturn with previous declines to understand its historical context. I am Hustler. Let's get started. The most commonly trusted and reliable measure of housing prices is the Case-Shiller Home Price Index. This index shows that housing prices at the national level started declining after reaching their peak in the summer of 2022. Housing prices typically do not decrease in nominal terms, and later we will look at real or inflation-adjusted housing prices, which provide a much better method of comparing housing prices over history. On this graph, you can see that over the last 30 years, housing prices have only declined 3 times. There was a 2% decrease during the 1990 recession and nearly a 30% decline during the 2008 recession. Housing prices did not decrease during the 2001 recession. Currently, housing prices have fallen by approximately 3% compared to the peak in the summer of 2022. However, as we know, the real estate market is regional, so in some areas, the declines have exceeded 3%, while some regions are still close to their peak levels. Besides the depth or magnitude of the housing price downturn, another way to measure the correction is the time it takes for the decline to occur. After the 1990 recession, even though housing prices decreased by only 2%, it took 37 months for housing prices to reach a new peak. During the 2000 recession, housing prices did not decline, but the 2008 recession led to a 30% crash in housing prices, taking 116 months to reach a new peak. Currently, housing prices peaked around 8 months ago, but these data are slightly delayed, so the real figure is closer to 10 or 11 months. However, the declines are still relatively small at the national level. The Case-Shiller Index publishes housing prices for 20 major cities, so we can measure how many cities show negative price growth for 6 consecutive months per rotation. During the 1990 recession, even with only a 2% average decline in housing prices, the downturn lasted for 37 months and affected 74% of the cities. The 2008 recession was much larger in magnitude, with a 30% decline and a duration of 116 months, impacting 100% of the cities. Clearly, we are currently in the midst of another housing price downturn, as declines are at about 3% from the peak. The duration of this downturn is 10 or 11 months, and 75% of the cities show declining housing prices. We can discuss the magnitude of this downturn, and in the next section, we will compare this housing price decline with a longer historical perspective. However, first, we need to examine the distribution of housing price declines and see where housing prices are falling the most and where they are holding up better. This is important because the conversation about real estate is highly fragmented. Some people feel that housing prices are dropping in their city, while others have hardly noticed any correction. These data will show why both of these situations are true. On this graph, we display the distribution of housing price declines in 20 major cities across the country. On the left axis of the graph, the percentage decline from the peak is shown, and on the bottom portion, the duration of the housing price decline is depicted. In the upper left corner, regions that have hardly been affected are shown, while the lower right corner represents areas where the housing market is suffering the most. Cities like Cleveland, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and Charlotte have experienced minimal correction. Housing prices here are only about 1 or 2% lower than their peak levels, and there are no sustained declines. On the other hand, San Francisco and Seattle have seen housing price declines of almost 15% in less than a year, comparable to the downturn in 2008. In mid-tier cities such as Dallas, Denver, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and Portland, there is a clear shift. and housing prices are decreasing by approximately 10%. So there is no doubt that the USA is experiencing a housing price downturn nationally, and depending on the location, the decline can be either absent or significant, with the national average currently in a moderate correction. However, how does this housing price decline compare to a longer historical perspective? If we want to compare housing cycles over a more extended period, we need to consider housing prices in real terms, or adjusted for inflation. There are several reasons why looking at housing prices in real terms is relevant. Housing is a crucial factor in wealth effects. When housing prices rise, people feel wealthier, and it is a common practice to refinance and withdraw equity from properties for consumption or to buy other real estate. However, this only works if housing prices are rising in real terms. Otherwise, the funds you pull out of real estate won't be able to sustain consumption of other goods, the prices of which are rising even faster. During periods of high inflation, such as the 1970s, housing prices may increase in nominal terms, but sharply decrease in real terms. When we look at housing prices in real terms, we see that they generally decline around recessionary periods, which is logical. The duration and magnitude of the correction vary, but they usually concentrate around recessionary periods. In real terms, housing prices remained stable over 4 decades from 1960 to 2000 before starting to demonstrate what can be called boom-bust cycles, with a 75% increase from 1997 to 2006 and a 78% increase from 2012 to 2022. In real terms, the national peak in housing prices occurred in May 2022. This peak was earlier for some cities like San Francisco and later for places like Miami, but now we are looking at the national average level only. The U.S. housing market has experienced 6 major downturns since the 1960s. Housing prices declined in real terms during all recessions except for 2001 and the COVID recession. Since May 2022, housing prices have decreased by about 6%. Regarding duration, during previous downturns, housing prices in real terms declined for 33 to 70 months, except for 2000 when there were no declines even in real terms. Another important observation is that housing prices usually bottom out at the end or after the recession. Housing prices are a slow-moving indicator that reflects the complete housing market cycle, which often takes 3 to 5 years. Thus, in the 6 major housing price downturns, including the extreme scenario of 2008 and the no-decline case in 2000, the average recessionary decline in housing prices was approximately 12%. The declines lasted for 37 months. Currently, housing prices have been decreasing for 6 consecutive months and are about 6% off their peak in real terms. But the economic downturn and most of the recessions are still ahead, so the declines are likely to continue and reach at least historical averages. The precursors of real housing price growth are still pointing downward. Overall, the U.S. housing market is in the midst of an ongoing downturn, with housing prices declining in 75% of cities. The declines are unevenly distributed, with some cities showing significant drops even before major labor market shifts, which is concerning, while in other cities, there is only a slowing of price growth without significant declines. The exact timing of the housing market bottom relative to previous economic downturns remains an open question, but there is no doubt that the market peaked in 2022, and the broad national momentum is pointing downward.